I found it fascinating when I was surrounded with a bunch of guys, hardcore boxers that jump in the ring, life or death situations for entertainment. But as a woman speaking with them, I learned that they opened up a lot and kind of showed me a vulnerable side when I'm talking with them about their stories, brutal stories. But I think it helped being a woman speaking with a lot of these folks, because there's so much nostalgia and memory and love for not just the place, but whether the fighters were their fathers or were themselves and went down or won or whatever it was. I found that they were more open. You know, you don't have to keep your guard up with me, you know, in that way.
Hello, welcome back to En Casa con la Plaza, the 18th and Grand Olympic Auditorium podcast. I am joined today by our Director of Exhibitions and Senior Curator, Karen Cruz Hendon, and also co-curator of the 18th and Grand Olympic Auditorium exhibition, Esperanza Sanchez. Welcome both. Very excited to talk to you. I've been looking forward to talking to you both since our last conversation.
Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah. So I guess we want to give our audience a introduction on you both. What got you into museum curation and history, and I guess your career and educational background, and then up until working at La Plaza. So whoever wants to start.
Sure. So I have a bachelor's and master's in history. During my master's program at CSUN, I specialized specifically in public history only because I've had experience working in museums. And my first introduction to exhibitions was really when I was working as a special collections librarian assistant as a student at CSUN. And so that was my first experience working with exhibitions, so a lot of the research and archives that they had. And then from there, I went to the Autry Museum, started off as a museum educator, and I was able to work with the curators directly on their temporary exhibitions to do educational tours or to do interactives. So that was another layer of introduction. And then through my master's program, I had all these incredible opportunities to do internships, and I was able to co-curate an exhibition at the Museum of Latin American Art.
Oh, cool.
And from all those experiences, both working in the museum field and then working in education in my old high school, Palisades Charter High School, I was able to move over to La Plaza Cultura y Artes for the Getty PST project that happened in 2017. And from there, I continued working up. So I've been working at La Plaza for 7+ years.
Wow.
And moved up and transitioned from a curatorial assistant up to now an associate curator. And I've had a great opportunity to not only work with Karen, but with previous other staff members that work at La Plaza and other institutions on exhibitions. So I'm super grateful for all those opportunities, and I will pass it over to Karen.
Yeah.
So I took a little bit more of a circuitous route. It wasn't very direct like Esperanza's, but art and music has been in my life since I was a kid. So my family actually got kicked out of LACMA when I was little, because I was found myself in a museum surrounded by an installation of gigantic pool balls, and I thought that was a magical thing. So I started walking inside, being inside these pool balls, and pushed one off, and it went rolling down the museum. And I remember I was, real little, so I wasn't very high, and these balls were huge and all different colors. And I remember seeing all the guards like running and, get a control of your daughter, and you can't be touching the art. And later on I ended up meeting that artist, and I told him what I did, and he was really pleased with me that I did that. But so ever since, I've been infatuated with art and music, and always has been something I've gone in between. So ended up getting my degree in music performance. Always loved museums, grew up going to museums, going up and, hiking in national parks and seeing art and things of that nature. So ended up getting my a second degree in foreign language and moved to Guadalajara, Mexico, to finish off my undergrad. And then came back and jumped into a master's for curatorial studies and exhibition design. So that is kind of like the formal training, but the informal training is really traveling. I love culture. I love people. And worked in museums up and down Northern and Southern California universities. And just there was always a piece missing for me with some of those places. They were very European focused, and always was searching for, something that had more of a cultural continuity and awareness. And so, I've been watching La Plaza for a long time, ever since they opened, and wondered one day if I would actually work there. So, it came up, and I'm super happy to be here. It's close to my family and my heart and the community. So, we get to do a lot of things that a lot of past places that I've worked at can't do.
Yeah.
So it's been a real treasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Thank you both. You both do incredible work for the community of Los Angeles. And I mean, beyond that now, I feel for me, like not being from LA, not being Mexican American, it's really amazing to see how like the work that you do is reaching outside beyond Los Angeles. And I'm hoping that this podcast will emphasize that as well. So thank you both for being here. Obviously, today we'll be talking about the exhibition at La Plaza, our current 18th and Grand Olympic Auditorium exhibition. So I wanted to go ahead and ask, what were some first thoughts when you got approached to take on this project?
That's so funny. Well, at least for me, I think it was just when we had open patriotism and conflict, fighting for country and comunidad. And again, we focus a lot at La Plaza about telling untold stories, right? And focusing on the Latinx perspective of Los Angeles and Southern California. Sometimes we'll expand it a little further to talk about the United States and Latin America, because then we kind of narrow it down to Los Angeles. So I think when it first got approached to us both, I was like, wait, what is this? I know about the building. I went to school in LA Trade Tech in the summer sometimes, and I would be like, what is this large mural of Christ, right? But I had no idea all the information that we ended up archiving, well, not even archiving, but finding and working with Steve and Jean and so many other people and the collectors, and then later on the community members. But I think for me, I realized as they were telling this story, I was like, okay, so it's focused on Los Angeles and it's focused on oral histories and public history and stuff like that. But I think one thing that really captivated us was the fact that it was so community oriented. It was such a community hub and center for so many people, but it was really an entertainment space that people utilize. And I think the fact that Steve and Jean kept mentioning to us that political rallies happened there were so many musical events, so many boxing, wrestling, roller derby, all these things that it was before the Staples Center. I think that's what got me kind of going of like, okay, so it is very community centered. Let's see where this story goes and how do we uncover those untold stories. And especially because it was so, it was emphasizing the Black and brown experience of Los Angeles at a time when there was so much racial division and so many things surrounding it that prevented people from interacting with one another. So if this space provided that, we wanted to kind of uncover that. So that was my perspective, but I'll pass it over to Karen.
So with mine, when I was approached, I felt like it was a little bit of an intervention. My old boss, John Echeveste, kept saying, "Oh, I got something for you. I got something you're gonna really like." And usually when he would say that, I would probably not like it. So I walk into a room with 3 gentlemen just sitting there, and I sit down, and I'm wondering what in the world this is, and they're talking about us doing a sports show. And I thought, oh, you got the wrong person. You guys have the wrong person. I don't even go to sports. I mean, I go to the Dodgers just for the micheladas. Like, I mean, my expertise is in contemporary art. I don't know, what we're going to do with this. This is boxing and wrestling. And, I kind of like the roller derby and I certainly love music, but I didn't really know the full concept of why would we be doing this, especially since La Plaza already did a baseball show. So, after sitting down and listening to it, there were a little bit of heartstrings around wrestling because my father dabbled in wrestling a little bit. And I grew up watching WWF and like the ridiculousness and the entertainment and the glamour of that, it was something that I remember as a kid. But, the more that Steve Dubrow, who has spent the last 10 years, right, of dedicating his life to this documentary and telling of these stories, I knew, okay, this has got to be serious. This man has spent so much time. He keeps saying, this is a story of LA. This is a symbol of LA. And so, I knew I was never going to catch up to them with people that have dedicated their lifetimes taking care of boxers and doing, oral histories and stories that, I knew Esperanza and I were in for it, trying to really catch up and learn who these characters are and how much went on there. 80 years history, right? But the more they spoke and we had more than one meeting, like Esperanza mentioned, we started realizing that these are cultural heroes and how, why should this exhibition be at La Plaza versus somewhere else? These are cultural heroes that weren't recognized. Right. These are cultural heroes that were people that impacted families, neighborhoods. They brought identity with them. I like the idea that when you entered the Olympic Auditorium, everything changed. There weren't rules. You could create whatever you wanted. You could be whoever you wanted. So I think this exhibition and the people that we worked with, they really wanted to highlight the who's who, the best of the best, right? And Esperanza and I just have a really different perspective. We're like, who are they behind the mask? Who are they? Where did they come from? What's their stories? What are their families like? How did they get here? What are their struggles? What are their triumphs? So we started seeing those layers really unfold. And that's the sweet stuff that we do at La Plaza. It's like we can honor our heroes. We can bring them in and talk about who are our heroes today, who are our heroes back then. But, they can be everyday people. You can put on a mask and a cape, or, you can get in the ring and you can fight in and out of the ring. But what is it that you stand for? And so it became a much more deeper project that, with Esperanza having public history and knowledge of that we started thinking about, this could be something that would be great for our audiences. And people can relate to these characters, even though they were a long time ago. And there's a lot of younger generations that have no idea what the Olympic is, or never went. We wanted to kind of play with that perspective of people would come in here and it would be interactive and it would be a place that evokes memory, because that memory is essentially gone. So it's been a huge journey, a couple of years of going down this path. Love working with filmmakers. They see things differently, and so that was a pleasure to be a part of that.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome to also hear you guys speak about how you also didn't really know anything about the Olympic before taking this on.
Pretty much not.
Not a real connection to it. And then once you dug deeper, you kind of find things that you do connect to that you never realized
it pulls you in. So it has this weird energy. So you hear all the stories of all these people that went, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's their stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I don't have a story that's connected, but there's a way into the Olympic no matter what.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And even in the weeks that I've been learning about this, I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable as you two, but I also find that it's I found that I get also drawn by the fact that it was such a center for expression and liberation, and it unified different races, and it brought people together, men and women, and that is never think something as surface level of something like that could be so profound,
right, with every decade.
Yeah, so I feel better knowing that you two were also just didn't know a thing, because taking on this podcast, I was like, I am not qualified to talk about this, but
No, we learned a lot of lessons. We
yeah.
And like Karen mentioned, I think it helps a little bit too, right? Wrestling for Karen, boxing for me. My dad is a big fan.
Yeah.
To this day, I still don't understand it. I'll watch it with him sometimes, but once we started working with a lot of boxers and wrestlers and athletes that were in roller derby, or even the musicians or the people that were producing these shows, we realized it was so intimate for them. There was a story behind it, but at the end of the day, they're human beings.
Yeah.
So it's very beautiful to hear it, because then we see the things that they're dealing with, but also the aftermaths of some of these fights and some of the repercussions that they had to deal with as well. Or also adding back to their community, whether they became trainers. We have Joseph Roberto, whose father lost his eyesight because of boxing in the 30s. But yet, somehow in the 40s, with his family, was able to develop this gym in Pasadena before YMCA, before any of these things were happening, in order to train over 300 amateurs, youth, that were teenagers up to, mid-20s probably. So again, there's so many ways that people lived a very high life or were relatively unknown, but that somehow always managed to contribute back to the community and still be part of the Olympic Auditorium. So that also helped us kind of make that connection, and I hope that it helped you also connect, and maybe other people as well.
Yeah, totally. And it's little things like that where you were like, oh wait, like I don't know, like I found like I love learning about like artistic expression and expression in general, because it's such a wonderful way for humans to like stop carrying so much on their backs and on their hearts, and it seems like all of these sports and music at the Olympic was a way to just let it out. And maybe like sometimes it would get crazy and a little bit violent, but
a lot of crazy, a lot
of violent, but it's I don't know, it's very beautiful to see at the same time. So obviously we've discussed there's not a lot of knowledge going into it, and I know it must have been very jarring to also take on this exhibition as two women. I want to know how that was like, because these are all very male-dominated sports, male-dominated business. Obviously, the exhibition highlights Eileen Eaton. But yeah, I'd love to hear your experience also as young women going into this,
Thank you for the young part.
Yeah.
We had to invoke a little energy from Eileen Eaton, it was a very male-dominated space, but there were families that went, there were women that went, but learning that this was such a wild and crazy and dynamic, controversial space, was run and managed by a woman for many, many decades. And every single boxer that I've spoken with, even some of the referees, one came yesterday, said nothing but respect for Eileen. You don't mess with her. She's the one that runs things. Yeah. She would mess with them,
Yeah.
And so it took a tough woman to really hold a place like that down. But the thing that I remember from a lot of the stories that have been shared is that they had a lot of respect for her. I mean, she was not only running things, but she was a promoter. She was a matchmaker. She's the one that made the place. As soon as she left, it died.
Yeah.
So, us going into this, I didn't feel intimidated as a woman, nothing like that. It was just a matter of, I know this is a very deep and vast subject with many, many players. I think my goal was to try and figure out all the characters and where they came from. And, one thing that was a bit of a misconception is, you're set up to be a villain or a hero. And then you don't realize that behind the scenes, everybody's are friends and they respect each other, But there was dynamic differences between what the audience wanted and what the resulting end of the fights wanted. And at least in my experience, I found it fascinating when I was surrounded with a bunch of guys, hardcore boxers that jump in the ring, life or death situations for entertainment. But as a woman speaking with them, I learned that they opened up a lot and kind of showed me a vulnerable side when I'm talking with them about their stories, brutal stories. But I think it helped being a woman speaking with a lot of these folks because there's so much nostalgia and memory and love for not just the place, but whether the fighters were their fathers or were themselves and went down or won or whatever it was. I found that they were more open. You don't have to keep your guard up with me, in that way. It's like maybe with other people, they got to keep that ego, they got to keep that, whatever it is that's that sort of facade. But I felt so privileged to have such profound and deep conversations with these like world champion fighters that I would never be speaking to. I would never be in a situation like this, I'm used to curating art exhibitions, right? So the fact that I got to sit down and have conversations with people at their homes as they're bringing out all of these collections that are near and dear to the heart, that they know these collections have nowhere to go, right? So we're putting them at La Plaza, but what happens after that? That they know that we actually care, and we know that this story is largely lost unless it lives somewhere and it's being told somewhere. So I thought it was a pretty good male-female, dynamic for myself.
No, and I would agree with Karen too, because again, we are coming into spaces where it's very male dominated, and you have Eileen Eden, who did all this extensive work, but she was really a mastermind. I mean, just intelligent and was able to work with the media, but also have many diverse programming because she knew she needed to get people to come to the Olympic Auditorium, because it was at a point where it was basically going to be falling apart. It could have been bankrupt, but she did so much work. And I think too, the fact that she was putting people out there who some were very famous, but then she had people that were not famous, and she helped them build their careers, whether they were Black, brown, Asian. It didn't matter. It didn't matter to her. What mattered was the relationship that she had with those individuals, but also the fact that she knew that Los Angeles was so diverse, and she wanted to bring those people to come to the Olympic Auditorium. And keep in mind, there's only like about 10,000 seats at the Olympic Auditorium, but somehow she would always manage to get people through the door. And sometimes they would have to have the events projected outside because the tickets would sell so quickly. And even at a time when, the mob was involved and less people were coming through, she managed to get cameras in there and tell people, sit in the center so it looks like it's full, to get ticket sales to go up. So again, all of that. And in a time when women were not at the forefront of these things, right? And also, from my understanding, her first husband had passed away. So she was on her own as a single mother, and then later on got married. So she was doing all of this. So again, very small, petite women, but very intimidating to a lot of these men. And I also want to echo what Karen said. I think it helped that we didn't have this information about the Olympic Auditorium. And I have a public history background, so I'm used to doing oral histories with people and opening up and things of that sort. But I think it helped both of us coming in, not having that perspective of the Olympic Auditorium. And I think, too, is the level of respect that we provided, but also we weren't like... how do I say, like, completely dazzled, like, oh, you want this championship. Instead, it was more of a conversation of, like, how was your training? Why did you do this? Or after the boxing, what do you do after when you have all this adrenaline running through you? But I think something, too, that was so important is when we went to these people's homes where they would come to La Plaza and bring these objects, everyone kept saying, well, I don't think you want to display this. Like, this is more of a personal momentum, but it means a lot. And we're like, no, that's the most important thing we should be displaying. Yes, we can display championship belts. Yes, we can display boxing shorts and things of that sort. But when you're displaying photographs of your family or things that are important to you, of course, that adds more into the story. So it helped to do that. And I think it also reminded them that actually we're not just focusing on your career, we're focusing beyond your career too, right? This is part of your legacy. And it's true, a lot of these things are in garages and they're in places where they're not being collected and they're not being preserved. And it's super important because when we worked with Steve and Jean, who are also our co-curators in the exhibition, I kept emphasizing how this history is going to get lost. And it's true. So if it's not being documented, it's not being preserved in collections, and then it's not being maintained by the families, those stories get lost. And we wouldn't know about it unless there was a documentary or unless we did oral histories or we did this exhibition to get that going. So there's many more out there. It's an 80-year history, and there's still so much things that should be uncovered. But that was the beautiful part about learning the story through the views of not only the players that were part of it, but also the people that have been doing this work for a really long time.
Yeah.
I'm going to admit that I was a little dazzled with Carlos Palomino,
Of course.
Alberto Davila,
Yeah.
Little Red Lopez. I mean, it's hard not to be. I
Yeah.
mean, they're pretty special in my heart. Yep.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, do you think if you guys had a little bit more of a bias going into these conversations you had with former boxers and wrestlers, do you think they wouldn't have opened up, or if you were much more of a fan, or do you just think, like, I don't know, because it's so fascinating to see how they were willingly opening up to you after, you know, I'm assuming with boxers and wrestlers there's so much machismo still to this day, and that is like a generational trauma. And sometimes I still find, like, I guess with my own relatives that are male relatives in my family, it's they're locked up, you know, so it's like, I don't know, it's something to think about that I thought was fascinating.
I mean, I think that it takes a certain mental condition to decide to be a boxer of all various reasons. I remember talking with Alberto Davila, who had he had a very bittersweet experience as a boxer. You know, he was in it his whole life. He had many losses. You know, we've talked about him before. By the way, he's one of the ones that we feel very dear with because he has such a huge heart. But you know, the guy's a pretty much hardcore guy. I mean, he got out of boxing because he wasn't winning. He traveled him all over the world, right? So then he gets back into it. He misses it. He gets back into it. Fights, you know, becomes a world champion, and the guy dies in the ring, right? He kills the guy.
Yeah.
And you know, the guy passed away 3 hours later or something like that at the hospital. And here's a man who's been training his whole life, and the bittersweet thing is a loss of life, and he doesn't get to celebrate as a world champion, you know? And it was really not even that long ago that he could bring himself to talk about this experience.
Yeah.
So all of these people that trained as major athletes, that they know mentally when they get in the ring, it's life or death, it's me or him. But yet when you take a step back, it's for our entertainment, but it's no entertainment inside the ring, maybe except for the fixed fights. That's entertainment, right? But, you know, all these folks are carrying around big bags of history and big bags of trauma in some cases. And it was a catharsis for them to be who they were. And that's, in some cases, all they knew how to do. And what happens when a building closes? What happens when, you know, newer athletes come into the scene and you know, you're maybe looking towards retirement as a fighter? It's a confusing way to go out. It's you're proud, but you don't know where you're supposed to be in your history, right? So when we're here and we're interested and we want to know, what was it like to be a boxer? How did you train? You know, literally Alberto's like, I checked myself into a hotel room and left my family for 2 weeks because I'd be a crazy madman if I stayed there.
Yeah.
I had to isolate myself and train my, you know, my brain to get into the fight 2 weeks before I entered the ring. And a lot of them don't even remember walking from the doors to the ring. So that psychology is fascinating, that response system to not only representing your community, representing your family, representing yourself. What does all that mean, and why do you do it, and why is this worth it? I mean, you're getting beat or you're beating. So I definitely think it definitely brought out more of my masculine side, you know, just kind of that competitive nature and that winning or losing. But even if you lost, you represented your neighborhoods. I mean, like Danny Little Red Lopez, he was like Mexican and Irish, and people loved him, you know, and he had like the headdress because he was born on the Ute Reservation. You had Bobby Chacon from Pacoima. You had, you know, Davila from Pomona. So you had a lot of these people that represented their neighborhoods that then, you know, their ties back to Mexico whenever there was like Mexican fighters crossing the border to come be at the Olympic. Then you had like this international, competition and people picked their sides, and that only made the experience better. And Eileen knew exactly what her audience was. She knew that this was a largely Mexican and Mexican American and Black and Asian venue. And it really was the only place where you could be this identity and represent, superheroes that we're aware of now. They're stripped of their identity. They're just superheroes.
Right.
Superman, Batman, whatever. There's no culture connected to them, right?
Yeah.
But these were heroes that brought their culture. Their families made their ring gear. They wore what they wanted to represent. They kept mostly their real names, and that's why it's such a dynamic impact for Los Angeles that I think has been forgotten, because so many people remember going there and the experiences were palpable. And there's just not entertainment like that anymore, except for maybe, the Lakers, the Dodgers. But there's never going to be a place where all of that was under one roof, even roller derby and even music. And speaking of music, that's why Gary Tovar, which I know you interviewed, was interested in the Olympic, because he was searching for a place like, where can punk rock go? There's no place, and once he heard of the Olympic and heard of the mayhem and the chaos, he thought, oh, this is a perfect fit for me.
Yeah.
So, aside from boxing, wrestling, there's such a whole other world that has been continuously celebrated through roller derby and music and identity and multicultural families.
Yeah, definitely. No, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Esperanza, or...
No, I think Karen covered a lot of it, which is super important. And I think for me, as an Angelino, I think I'm just used to seeing a lot of people from Hollywood and stuff like that. So I don't get as dazzled, even though there's other times that I do. But
There's not one person. Okay,
Yes, there is,
I'm going to call you out.
Yes, there
I'm
is.
going to say Enrique Bolaños.
Oh, that's true. But what I mean is, like, in the sense of, like, I think because I go in the mindset of, like, being a public historian and as an engineer, you have to, like, kind of play it cool and stuff like that. However, though, once you're in it and you're having these conversations, all these things come about, and I think I've always enjoyed that. But one of the things, too, when Karen was mentioning the music, I think it's super important, because when we do think about music, even in the 80s and punk rock, even then, most people will think of it as like, oh, it's just a music genre, but there's so much history behind that as well, and we got to learn that as well as we were archiving and going through people's collections and things like that. And it helps to have that highlighted in the gallery, because people can see that music was very important to the Olympic Auditorium. It was supposed to start off with opera, and then later on you have Dolores Huerta, Dolores del Rio, being honored by the Mexican consulate here in Los Angeles. And this is 1927, and they're marketing it in LA Times, La Opinión, and calling it Fiesta de la Raza. And you have people that are coming in because they love Dolores del Rio based off her acting, but also her dancing. And you have the LA Examiner also using her for their music entertainment that they do every year for their staff. So all of those things are interconnected, and it just demonstrates that this is Los Angeles, and you would make the assumption that because there was racial divisions that the Olympic Auditorium would do the same thing, but instead you have so many people that are coming together, and at a time when they're traveling from outside of Los Angeles to get here without freeways. So it's a lot of things going on, but yet somehow they managed to come to the Olympic Auditorium. So it does help with all of this. And it helps too that women were the ones archiving all of this history,
which is
very important. So we were very captivated by that as well. And if those stories weren't being preserved, whether through the family members or through people that were really enthusiastic, because there's a lot of fans that have so much memorabilia, and that also helped. And when you go through the galleries, you'll see that this is a very different exhibition, and it definitely is a kudos to Karen and Tom for their design that they did in this exhibition, because it is so many objects, but it's oriented in such a way that you don't feel overwhelmed, but you actually want to learn more about the objects and why it's there. And you notice that it's a very personal momentums. But I think also to the collectors, they have something else attached to it. It's not just because they're fans. They have a story behind it. To them, this was their passion, or it helped them get through their life. So it definitely is very important to highlight that as well.
Yeah, which I wanted to ask also, like, what was it like outreaching to find all the artifacts that you have in the exhibition, because the exhibition at La Plaza has robes, posters, photographs, gear, everything. And because like it was becoming such a lost piece of history of LA, like it must have been challenging at first to reach and find these artifacts.
Well, it helped that we had a lot of collectors.
Yeah.
So we started off with that. And I think we were so inundated with so many different collectors and going through things and checklists and stuff like that and making decisions on objects. But I think once we opened it up to the community, and I've been part of probably 4 or 5 of them now, and this is probably the second one that I've led. But one of the things is that every time we work with the community, it's so fruitful. They bring all of these objects and stories that were not included priorly. And I think especially with the Olympic Auditorium, as Karen was mentioning, we have these people who were heroes or villains, right? Or the who's who. But then you have people who were amateurs and they were just starting off their careers, whether they're boxers, wrestlers, or even roller derby. But one of the things that was so fascinating is the fact that so many people that came through were women. And they brought their family's history. So we have Lori Lopez, whose father, Armando Lopez, was a lucha libre wrestler in Mexico, in Guadalajara, I believe, then moved up to the United States in Los Angeles about late 60s, early 70s, met his wife at a bar, got married, had kids, lived down in the Downey, Southgate area, bought a home, butcher by trade, right? But
This
yet,
is one of our favorite stories.
Yeah.
and the beautiful thing about it is and of course I'm on the phone with Lori and I'm like, bring whatever you have. She's like, wrestling outfits? I was like, bring anything. Doesn't matter. Bring the whole trunk if you need to, right? And she did. She brought outfits and photographs and things like that. But as we're having this conversation with her, she's talking about how her father worked Monday through Friday in a butcher, carniceria and everything. And then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, he was at the Olympic Auditorium wrestling. And of course, they didn't go because it was too violent. It was too much.
He wouldn't let them.
No, he wouldn't, because his wife did go one time and then actually got involved because he was like losing. And so she started like yelling and screaming and trying to hit the other wrestler. Yeah.
She
my
thought this was
God.
real. She thought he was really getting hurt.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So I think after that, they're just not involved. But one of the things that Lori shared with us is that she opened up this trunk, and it's been 10 years that her father passed away, and didn't realize that all of these outfits were the same outfits that her and her sister would wear together, right? But as they're going through it, she called her sister because she realized that in one of his why can't I think about it? Serape outfit that he put, because again, he's very much in tune with his Mexican identity and culture, and he's not putting it for entertainment value. He's putting it for his own kind of pride and putting this in the forefront for the Olympic Auditorium. But there was 2 photographs of both Lori and her sister Lisa, and she had no idea. Started sobbing, called her sister, and she came over and then shared this story with us. So that kind of story we put in the exhibition. So then Mando Lopez, again, just early fighter.
Tell her what his name was.
He was Super Estrella in Guadalajara. But then, of course, here he was Mando Lopez. And the fact that he was in his wrestling match with so many other wrestlers, but including Andre the Giant. And you wouldn't know that based on the photographs, because you just see Andre the Giant, and he's this tall man, right? Big, bulky man. But then when you look at the photographs, you're like, oh, yeah, that is Mando Lopez. Oh, yeah, that is that person. But again, would we know this? No, because even in our own public library and other places, it only locates the who's who. It doesn't locate the individuals that were part of the story as well. So we were excited.
It was like Christmas. I mean, to answer your question in a short
Yeah.
answer,
Yeah.
it wasn't hard for me and for us, I don't believe, because people were showing up
Yeah.
with their car loads of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like we never knew what to expect, and like incredible stuff came out. I mean, you just heard about Mando Lopez and Super Estrella, and we also had Lita Merez, the Latin Hellcat, right?
Yeah.
We were hell-bent on trying to find a lady wrestler, and we worked with Rock Rims, who is a wrestling scholar, and I said, Rock, we got to find a lady wrestler. We've got to find a lady wrestler. And, so he said, well, there's a few. I'll go see if I can find them. And, we contacted the Merez family. And so, again, 2 sisters, just like Mando Lopez, show up with full-on, like, lucha outfits for this woman that they bring out. I mean, they even remember my eyes got super big. I was so stunned. Her jacket was sequins, and on the back was like the symbol of the Mexican flag, hand sewn sequin of that in this beautiful royal blue. Wow. And she had like her name Lita stitched on her white boots. And we ended up doing a little bit more research and found out that she was a mentee of Mildred Burke, who ended up starting like a lady wrestler training camp out in the valley. So again, there were females and males that were being trained, and I think if I remember correctly, like she was interested in doing roller derby, and then it was like better that she went into wrestling. But aside from these characters, there's art in this exhibit. It's easy to walk in, and it's a very interactive and engaging design where you walk in, there's the marquee. We wanted people to be able to walk into the museum and feel like they're walking into the Olympics. So like Esperanza said, it's super dense and intense. I would say it's kind of overwhelming, but that was purposeful, is to get people to, be squeezed into a hallway, and you're passing under a real marquee that Tom Rosenquist, our senior prep, made. And right when people walk in, they have told me that's like their first memory, is walking across the parking lot and seeing the marquee. Wow. And having like not knowing what was going to happen that night, but knowing what the fights were. And, we drop the audience right into the ring. You first walk into the room, you're in the ring, you're surrounded by photo murals of the audience. There's mirrors behind the actual boxing ring, so that when you're inside looking at things, you're encased. Not only you're between the boxers, and you're between the audience members. And then we have a vintage microphone that hangs down, and the announcer comes on, so you get the sound of what it was like for the announcer to announce these boxers. And we wanted areas of intensity and drama and excitement, but then we wanted areas where then you get to back off, go back in time and history, and see things from the 20s and 30s and 40s. And, and there's certain highlighted people that we knew were important, which was, the